Hello and welcome to Seeing Jesus with Paul Miller. I'm Liz Voboril, and I'm here with Paul and our colleague Robert Rowe, who heads up our student ministry. We have been talking through Discipleship. That's our most recent series, which wrapped up in our last episode. And so today, as we transition, we're going to pick up on a story that was actually part of the faith study that we left off of in the wintertime. This is, we're going to look at the story of the Samaritan woman and kind of see how all these angles of Jesus that we've been talking our way through come into play, how we see them all in action in this story. Paul, why don't you give them a little wider intro for that there?
Well, all of our trainers within seeJesus and apprentices who have taught this lesson, including myself, it's probably one of our favorites. And it's the story from John 4, very long story of Jesus' encounter with this woman who is a Samaritan woman. And it's interesting. Jesus, the stories in the Gospels that Jesus connects with women are some of the most complex stories. And they just have a lot of richness. I mean, they're like these diamonds that are multifaceted. And this story is probably one of it's like the hope diamond of Jesus' interactions with people. I mean, it's a remarkable conversation that he has.
I've heard it described as the longest conversation we have recorded between Jesus and a person.
It is, I believe, the actual longest conversation that we have recorded between two people that are of people of the non-elite class, which is the top 1%. It is the longest conversation that we have in antiquity. I mean, so it's a really remarkable conversation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, so shall I jump in and read for us, Paul?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, this is John 4, 1-7. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. When the Lord learned of this, he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water.
Good. Thank you, Liz. Let me just paint the picture here a little bit. So just the physical landscape to get a sense of things. So Jesus has been down in the Jordan River Valley. So it doesn't look like, so we are north of Jerusalem. We're pretty much north of Jerusalem on the Ridge Road that goes along the central Judean highlands, but he's down into the east in the Jordan River, and there is several roads that go through these dry riverbeds called wadis. So he has come up. There is a wadi that has a road on it from that time that Jesus has come up. And on the eastern side of that road that goes of the mountains of Judea, it's a desert. It's very much like the Sierra Nevada in California, where and up into Oregon, it's what's called the rain shadow, and so Jesus is coming up this dry riverbed with I'm sure they had ways of bringing water up with them, but
his camelback, undoubtedly.
Yeah. So that's just a long explanation of why Jesus is thirsty,
Mm-hmm.
And then the other, so as you come up this road, so you're coming to ancient Samaria now, the heart of where the northern kingdom was. So these two mountains, Mount Gerizim on the left and Mount Ebal on the right, and right between them is Shechem or Samaria. The old word which was and I think it means shoulder. So it's kind of a shoulder a little bit off of Mount Ebal. And the children of Israel went there and read the curses from Deuteronomy, at the end of Deuteronomy after they entered the promised land and had defeated Jericho. So this place has a lot of history and, about it. And then The timing, 6 hours, 6 o'clock. It's actually a little hard to know whether that's Roman or Jewish time. So if it's Roman time, it's 6 o'clock in the evening. If it's Jewish time, it's noon. And, I won't make a big deal out of it because we don't really absolutely know. And there's a well here. And one of the neat things that it's a very iconic, like in genders were separated. There was no confusion in the ancient world with genders. They were completely separated. But one place that they came together was wells, because it was you had to come together, women who would be, a shepherdess or, to getting water out of the well. And so that's why you have several pictures of romances coming, in wells. So you've got Moses at a well, meeting a woman that he marries. You have Abraham's servant meeting that woman at a well that becomes the wife for Jacob, and then Isaac. And then you have Jacob. The iconic one is Jacob meeting Rachel at the well, which is just a really endearing and iconic picture in the Old Testament. I think I don't know. Are there any more? But so it's a places where people fall in love, and so it's really neat that this is a story. Deliberately, it's almost like Jesus is likely reenacting the love of his bride, the church. Is really what he's doing in this. So he's working at all these different levels, which is typical of Jesus. Mm-hmm. It's also a very human level.
Yeah.
Robert, did you have a?
No, I think that's really, really beautiful. It's the second Adam. With another picture of an Eve, right? And a picture of the garden again. Paul, I did always wonder, that one little verse that says he had to go through Samaria.
Yeah.
I've always seen that as like, was that the way the Wadi was forcing him to go up this little channel and he had to go that way? Or is this a play on theological fun of John saying this was an appointment that Jesus knew he was going towards?
Often John works at both levels, because he's picking up Jesus the way Jesus works at both levels. So
yeah.
I think it probably was the way he wanted to go. Many, there's references in the Talmud, but don't forget the Talmud, the Mishnah is 200 years after Jesus and the Mishnah is 400. So there's some sifting, we don't know all of it, but it was common for Jews to avoid this area, but it's clear from the Gospels, Jesus didn't always avoid it, and it was not unusual. But now that you brought it up, these are two people in groups that really didn't like one another. And they've been working at this so long that I think they had moved to enjoying not liking one another.
Yeah. And your intro of the well as a place of romance almost like reformats this story in my head, in my heart, to go, let's watch this story of love unfold.
Yeah. I mean,
really
this
beautiful.
is like a Hallmark. This is like as close as the Bible gets to the Hallmark Channel.
Wow.
That comes from, the way God has structured my life. I am in contact, with teenagers, with 14 living grandchildren and teenagers and young adults. And then there's Kim, so, I mean, I am really catching up on Three Stooges is Saturday night now, and Hallmark
Sweet.
Is during, so I can tell you every genre. Okay.
Wow.
So, I mean, I don't know if it's worth anything to know all that stuff, but
clearly we should do another podcast on television trivia, best of the series.
I do know this. I texted Julie, one of our staff, because she likes Hallmark, that if you're the blonde kind of little mean secretary. If you're the blonde model who is dating the rich entrepreneur and you're kind of high maintenance, you're toast. I mean, the brunette secretary is going to take you down in a half an hour. I mean, you're gone, Anyway, sorry. This is really digression here, Liz.
That's right. Right. Jesus is much less predictable though than the Hallmark channel. So what's next?
Yeah. So she comes from Sychar. I mean, probably forgetting what time it is. It is remarkable that she is alone. You know what I mean? It's just women to this day do things together more than guys, and this was a hard job, and so she's coming from down from Sychar. So she'd be coming down to the well. You dug wells in lower parts, and this is a pretty deep well. I mean, it was measured like, I don't know what it was, like 250 feet or something when it was measured 150 years ago. It's kind of silted over as they tend to do. But it's also helpful to remember these are both single. Jesus is not married, and it's likely, so the disciples have, gone in the village to get food. It's almost certain that John, his beloved, or one of the other disciples, but likely John, because he's writing it, stayed with Jesus.
And part of that, Paul, is that part of that you're saying is just because of the detail we have in this particular conversation?
Oh yeah. This is an eyewitness account,
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then, so there's just unusual. And so that's just the broad spectrum. But back to the Samaritan, there are two very big barriers that separate. One is the Samaritan Jew barrier, and you've probably heard stories, but when Jesus, this was about 8 AD or 9 AD, the Samaritans crept into the temple and had hidden in their garments, which you could do with the garments, pig bones, and scattered them all through the temple on the eve of Passover so the Jews couldn't celebrate Passover. It was just mean.
I feel like we might be back on the Hallmark channel, actually. This meanness.
Yeah. I mean,
takes an evil turn.
It was just evil.
Yeah.
I mean, they really hated one another. The Samaritans followed the 5 books of Moses. So they had yellow tassels on their garments. They were very devoted to the 5 books of Moses. And that's which is kind of handy because there's no mention of Jerusalem in the Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There's all this reference to the city that you dwell where and originally the temple was in Samaria, in that area to the west and southwest of Samaria during the time of the judges. So they were devout. They actually, and there's references in the Jewish literature of the day of how devout they were. They were devout, like they weren't, they're portrayed. We don't have a lot of literature of them. And oddly enough, there's still 600 Samaritans around today, and they have their high priest, and they won't eat with you. So nothing has changed in 2,000 years. This was a National Geographic article I read it was maybe 10 years ago. So let me just pause there. Any thoughts or let me mention the next barrier. The male-female barrier is a huge barrier. And it's very hard for us to get our mind around that barrier. We can sort of understand a little bit the Samaritan Jew barrier, but the male-female just seems a little odd that you just didn't speak to women in public. I mean, there's one guy in the Talmud who is commended because anytime he was around women in public, he would throw stones and dirt at them.
He was commended for this?
Gracious.
And it was an attempt at purity. Fake. I mean, it was a terrible purity, but shows the kind of culture Jesus was up against, where it's been so external. That's why actually you don't see a lot of Talmud calendars, like anyway. Enough corny jokes, Paul. Liz, do you want to, or anything?
I'll pick up the story for us.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, continuing in John 4, 7-9. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans.
Robert, what we've talked a lot about this passage. What do you love about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the beginning of this conversation. It's just so it's very logical. It's very human. It's very, just Jesus enters this conversation with a real gentle, like, "Hey, will you give me something to drink?" And it's no,
right.
Just a very simple entering of the conversation. I could imagine myself at the well at this time, if I was unable to draw water, I would definitely ask for a drink, but then I'd be like, "Okay, conversation over. Thanks for getting the water for me." But
Right.
It's Jesus' way of entering in.
Yeah.
The loving way he enters into this story.
So I love this entry point too, but I guess I have a practical question that I wonder, Paul, if you have any insight on, because to me, it seems like, well, if Jesus has been hanging around the well, couldn't he just get himself a drink before the woman came? Or
well, she mentions that problem in a minute. So
okay.
because then he says he's going to get his own drink, and she says you have nothing to draw water with.
Okay. I guess, she goes back to that. So there's not like there's a common bucket or something out there. I guess you'd have to drink from it.
You would bring like a leather pouch.
BYO. It's a BYO thing.
Yeah, right. It's a BYO at the well. Bring your own bucket. And what it is it would be like a leather, like a leather pouch with like like on a deep well, a 200-foot, leather string or twine. They had both, and that you would lower it down in and get your water and then, pull it up. Okay. So she has come with not just a jar, but that pouch. Now, here's the fun thing about this story is you don't really it sounds like an innocent question. You don't really understand what's going on with Jesus' question and the immensity of it until you hear her response. Mm-hmm. Because she says, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman? How can you ask me for a drink?" It's almost like a verbal recoil, but she's not recoiled. She's not distant. She's shocked,
mm-hmm. Well, and the power in it's all hit. So hers is more the don't you know what I am? Kind of like, are you a blind man that you don't understand that I'm not who you would ask this of, right?
Right. Do you realize, Jesus, we're in the 1st century and men and women don't talk to one another. This is not the 21st century, Jesus.
Like, you're blowing your cover, son of God. You're blowing your cover.
Yeah. I mean, there are all these references where you don't even drink from the Jew in the Talmud. You don't drink from the drinking vessels or use the utensils of a Samaritan. Because so not only is he talking to a woman, which is incredible, in public, but he's saying that he's going to put his lips on a drinking vessel that her lips have been on. And one of the things they said, is that, Samaritan, women were always, I'm not even sure I want to say it. It's just they were always physically unclean, and therefore everything they touched had to be unclean. And so it was anyway, it's just
anathema.
Yeah, just it's astounding that the freedom with which Christ is operating in, that he's not bound to these cultural narratives that have been created. And he's actually transcends the cultural, right? He sees, I would just, goodness, could you imagine what a fun study to be able to just dive into all these interactions of Jesus and women and just how he sees these image bearers and dignifies and just enters, like, this is not uncomfortable for Jesus.
Right.
In the way that he sees her, but it's super uncomfortable for her, obviously.
And it gives you a sense of why sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes wanted him for dinner.
We're drawn to him.
I mean, it's just, this guy's interesting. He's fun. He's, you know what I mean? There's a simplicity. He's not putting people in categories.
He's also like just very unpretentious, right? Like so surprisingly unpretentious. And that you pick that up in her question back to him, you know.
Now, so how would a typical village woman at that time react?
Well, if someone with more power than you asks you to do something that you can just quietly take care of and move on, go back to your business, it's strange that he asked, but whatever, here you go. I'm going back to, staying in my lane.
And that, right. And Liz, you nailed it. And so what do we, and what kind of care? I mean, you can pick up her personality almost immediately. When people do awkward things, even if they're good awkward things in public, most of us, even forget the first century, even now, if someone does something unusual in public, or not appropriate socially, most of us sort of, it's just awkward, you know, and she states the exact awkwardness. Like she says, she states the problem, you know, like she's just, it's like kind of like she's met a Martian.
Yeah. Well, most of us seek to smooth over the awkwardness with as much as possible, but she goes straight. She meets it head on. Like, wait, no, you're a Jew.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite way of describing this is if it's almost like Jesus, like if Jesus had levitated in front of her, okay, you wouldn't say, or as I say to people, if I levitate in front of me, you don't say, why are you levitating? I mean, I could be levitating because I'm showing off. That's a secondary question. The primary question is, how the heck can you do that? By the way, just for the record, I don't levitate. I don't know how to levitate. I'm just, but that's what she says. She says, how can you, like, the very big difference between why are you doing this, which would be the answer would be love. But how, like, what Jesus did was incredible. And that how brings that out. Does that make sense, everybody?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Paul, I think, this is a beautiful example of what we long to teach people as they're reading scripture, of just the slowing down.
Yeah.
Of just that question of how, like that really is intriguing to take it from that angle and go, okay, before I read on, if I was Jesus, how is he going to answer this? Like, this is interesting.
Right. Right.
It draws you in, and she's drawing him in.
Yeah. When I've done this as a lesson, I know both you guys have taught it too. What I love to do is say, what she's like as a person. And I've kind of led with that. That she's kind of, and I have people list and someone will sense, and she's kind of, Calvin, the great John Calvin called her cheeky. It's actually, of all the commentators I've read on this, the only one that actually nailed her personality is Calvin. And he doesn't like her. He thinks she's disrespectful. And
he lived in a different time too.
Right. I am a Calvinist, but whatever, not in that area. But what I love about what I felt first for the time was reading it slowly, Robert, like you were saying, I realized I wrote, and it's right in the book behind me in Edersheim's book on Jesus. I wrote my wife's name, Jill, in the print in the margin, with an exclamation mark because this is her to the T. And I have to tell a story that my editor cut out of the book. Okay. So it won't take me but a minute, but so this was when Jill was pregnant with our 5th child. And it was a Philly hot summer in the 90s in our old little Nissan station wagon when they called them Datsuns. And there was no air conditioning in it. It was just a brutal hot day. And she got caught in a speed trap going 32 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. And the police officer jumped out of the bushes, and my son John, who was a little guy, said, "Hey, this is like Dukes of Hazzard," which really dates us. Okay,
which is really funny that she gets a ticket for going 32 and a 25. Like that's in the grace period, that's in the.
It must have been a tight month in our township, and so the officer, for whatever reason, was taking a long time, filling the ticket out. So Jill's really
probably with paper and pen back then. Just saying.
Yeah. So did I say 9 months? She was 8 months pregnant. So she waddles. You don't walk when you're that pregnant. Back to his car after about 15 minutes. And she says to him, she knocks on his glass window and says, "What are you doing? Writing the Declaration of Independence?" and she waddles back to the car, waits another 10 minutes. She's got, I forgot to mention, our older 3 plus Kim were in the car. Kim was about 4 or 5, and she pulled them all out of the car. So now she's been waiting like 25 minutes. And she goes back, takes them all back to the police car, knocks on his glass again. He's sitting in his cruiser, and she says, "Can I sit in the back where the cage is with the kids while you finish?" So it's hard to say no. So he unlocked it. She got in the back with all the kids, and Kim was back there munching on her granola bars.
Oh my goodness.
But they got in air conditioning. So
hysterical.
That's my wife.
Oh,
you know what
goodness.
I mean?
Oh my goodness.
Like, I know this lady, it's probably why I enjoy her. It's just, and this pattern, Liz, keep reading before I tell more stories.
Yeah. Let's read about the cheeky woman.
The cheeky one. Here, John 4:10-12. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?"
All right. This is great. I mean, one of the first things here is that Jesus says, "Will you give me a drink?" No. And then she says, "What planet are you from?" And she says, and then he says, "If you knew that," so they're actually throwing back and forth this word "you," which is like there's a little light bantering here, going on, and it continues through their conversation that it's just slightly accented. And, it's just great because what he does, he flips it. I mean, at every point he creates intrigue, and I need to explain a bunch of things here. So, if you knew the gift of God and who it has asked you for a drink, you would have asked you and he would give you living water. To explain what Jesus means by living water, I have to explain water in Israel. So, the worst kind of water is stale cistern water. Okay. Think of a Coke that's been sitting out for several days. Okay. And then, the next water would be well water. So think of a Coke that has not been sitting out but it's warm. Okay. All right. That would be like well water. And then the next one up would be living water, which is running water. Okay. That's sparkling spring water. Okay. So you get that cistern well, and they really taste different. You know what I mean? It just, and spring water is like, well, and if you've ever, I grew out west. I just love drinking from springs, it just, there's something, Robert, I'm sure, Liz, now you were in Chicago. Did they have any springs there, Liz?
No, but we went to the mountains.
Okay. So. All right. So,
yes.
And so he's changed the language a little bit. And it's fun to kind of watch him. And then here it's her to a T. You have nothing to draw with. So so he's just said he's going to give her water, and it's going to be a higher quality water than he asked for. And the well is deep. So where are you going to get this water? You idiot. Are you greater? And then essentially says, who do you think you are? Are you greater than our father? So here's this allusion back to Jacob. So very much on Jesus' mind and John's mind is the linking of the ancient history of this well. Are you, who do you think you are? So it's just, I don't know. It's just like they're both fully engaged now. Like there's energy in the conversation. What are your guys' reflections? I'm hogging up all the fun here.
Go ahead, Liz. You go first.
Well, you do feel the energy of their conversation and the engagement. Also, it is, I feel that boldness and direction, it's normal to assess the person you're talking to, but she tells him her assessment, right? Which is also not, is part of that,
right. But she did that the first time,
right,
too.
Right, she's been that way straight all the way through, right? Not in the back of the mind noting, but saying it all to him. So you feel so much of that energy and that, they're saying a lot of words too. I know that as we move through here, Paul, you get us to pay attention to some of that pacing back and forth. But at this point, this is a fun dynamic, in the movie, this is easy. This is fun. This has a lot of energy and chemistry to it.
Robert?
I just found, I was talking with Donna, our new colleague, about this earlier. And, we were just batting around, just thinking, it's interesting because my heart and my mind, because I'm so attuned to fallen condition focus, I automatically lump this woman into, she's being disrespectful. I know her history. Here's this sinner woman at a well with Jesus. What's she doing? I don't see her as a person. And so because I've done that, and obviously she's a sinner, we're all sinner, but there's this beauty that's going on here, Paul, that I think is just wonderful that we love to just draw people out. And we're looking at this from a person perspective that's really beautiful, that Jesus sees her not first of all as sinner, but as this woman of Samaria. And I think my tendency is to see sinner first. And then hopefully by the grace of God, I'll get to image bearer person, Imago Dei, but it's 4 steps later for me, but right out of the chute, that's what Jesus sees.
Yeah. Well, and he sees it and he enjoys her, which that's exactly what's so lovely. Because it is, he's not again, he's not even well, the most efficient thing would just be to tell you, look, I'm living water, repent of your sin, let's move on. There's something even in a sense, the play of this conversation that he's just 100% present and enjoying her as a person.
Right. And you can see that through the way, if someone is brassy, like my wife, if you want her to tone down, the last thing you do is talk to her the way Jesus does, just look at that. If you look at the way in his comment there, in one sentence, he intrigues her 4 times. If you knew, which begs the question, who it is, which, you would have asked him, he would have given you, so he's egging her on he's creating this, he's kind of making himself this package that's dying to get unwrapped.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's picked up on her personality.
Yes.
You know? And I don't think he's like, it's not like magic mind reader Jesus that he's like knows her personality right out of the gate. I think he opens this dialogue with this question. I'm interested to see how this woman responds. And then he just picks it up very quickly that she's ready to engage. I just love that.
The intuitive people that I know who read people really well, and whether it was divine that Jesus knew it or just intuitive, right. Maybe a combination of both. But I suspect he knew what she was like before she even said a word. It's just the intuitive people I know are just so good at reading people. Mm-hmm. It takes me a while to figure them out because I'm lost in thought or something like that, but whatever. But notice just a couple more dynamics. One is that he is actually moving towards her. And so it's not like if you think she mentions the space, in fact, the walls between them, and Jesus has done nothing but move towards her.
Right. Like the other response would have been like, oh, I failed to notice that you were a Samaritan woman. So
right.
Right. Like step aside.
Right. All right, Liz, go ahead. John 4.
John 4:13-15. Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring.
We're going to continue the conversation in our next podcast. So it's just like this is like a Netflix series where you're going to have to wait a week, a couple of weeks to get the next one.
We'll have to play the music, like dun dun, starting the next episode now.
But let me say this. This is from our faith unit of our Person of Jesus study. And also, so we're just following that. If you had that in front of you, you would be saying, oh, they're not all that creative. But we it is so much fun to teach this. I think I've taught this lesson 20 times, and it's especially fun to do it with non-Christians. So we've particularly written the Person of Jesus study so it would include non-Christians. And Robert Rowe has rewritten all our Person of Jesus studies, who's with us here on the podcast, as with a youth version or teenage or student version. So maybe next time, Robert, you can tell us a little bit about at the end of the podcast.
All right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a couple more weeks.